Staff doesn't enter through this door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The man stood slightly to the side, one hand open, palm facing the narrow corridor behind me. A service hallway lined with beige walls and the faint metallic clatter of trays. The kind of hallway meant to stay invisible. The kind you're supposed to disappear into. Behind me, the heavy VIP door closed. If you've ever been judged before you had the chance to speak, if you've ever been pointed toward the wrong door without explanation, stay with me. And before we go on, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? This story travels farther than you think. Not slammed, not dramatic, just a dry final sound. The click echoed louder than the music inside. For half a second, no one spoke. Then someone laughed, quietly, politely. The kind of laugh that doesn't challenge anything, only confirms it. I felt eyes slide over me, measuring, deciding, sorting. In that moment, the room didn't see a guest. It saw a category. I stood there holding the envelope I had been told never to let out of my sight. Thick paper, clean edges, my name printed clearly on the front. Claire Morgan. The man didn't look at it. He didn't look at me either. Not really. His eyes stayed just past my shoulder, already done with the interaction. This event has standards, he said calmly. The service entrance is around the corner. The word standards landed harder than the instruction. I could have argued. I could have explained. But something stopped me. Not fear, recognition, because I had seen this before. Not this room, not this door, but this exact moment, the instant when a decision is made without asking permission from the truth. I took a breath, steady and quiet, the way you do when you know reacting won't change anything yet. That's when I felt it, a shift, not in the room and in the air. Someone had stopped walking behind me. Conversation softened. I didn't turn around, but I knew. The weight of attention had changed direction. And then, without a word, I felt a presence close enough that I didn't need to see it to understand what it meant. A hand touched my arm, firm, unhurried, not guiding me toward the service hallway, pulling me back. The man who had just dismissed me froze, and for the first time since I arrived, the room went completely still. But to understand why that moment mattered, why that door would come to define everything that followed, you need to know what happened before anyone decided where I belonged. The first time it happened, I didn't even realize it was humiliation. I thought it was confusion. A mistake. One of those small social errors that happen when rooms are busy and people are distracted. I had been invited to deliver documents for a private charity reception. Confidential, time-sensitive, the kind of thing my boss trusted only me with. He had said it twice before I left the office. Don't hand this to anyone else, and don't let it out of your sight. I arrived early. I always did. That habit came from years of relying on buses instead of drivers, schedules instead of assumptions. I stood outside the mansion for a moment, adjusting my grip on the envelope, watching the way guests were greeted. There was a pattern, names were checked, smiles appeared, doors opened. When it was my turn, the pattern broke. The hostess barely glanced at the paper in my hand before her eyes flicked to my shoes. Sensible, polished, not remarkable. Her smile didn't vanish. It simply stopped forming all the way. "You're with catering?" she asked, already reaching for the clipboard again. "No," I said softly. "I'm here for—" She waved a manicured hand toward the side path without looking up. "Service entrance is around the corner." The first sting wasn't the instruction. It was the certainty. I tried again, lifting the envelope just slightly, enough for the embossed seal to catch the light. "I was told to—" She sighed, not impatient. Worse. Polite impatience. The kind reserved for people who were supposed to know better. "Everyone has standards to follow tonight," she said. "Please don't hold up the line." Behind me, a couple shifted. I felt it, the subtle pressure of expectation. Move. Don't make this awkward. So I stepped aside, not because I believed her, because I recognized the moment. Inside rooms like that, truth doesn't enter first. Perception does. I walked toward the service hallway, the sound of music growing distant, replaced by the quiet clatter of metal trays and hurried footsteps. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something fried. A staff member passed me without looking up. Another brushed past, apologizing automatically. I stopped halfway down the corridor. This wasn't right. I turned back, heart beating harder than it should have. The main entrance door was still visible through the glass. Guests laughing. Crystal catching the light. That door looked heavier from this angle. Thicker. Like it knew who it was meant to keep out. I stood there for a full 10 seconds before someone noticed. A man stepped into my path. Mid-50s. Perfectly tailored suit. The kind of posture that comes from inherited confidence, not earned authority. His smile was calm, friendly, dismissive. "You can't go back that way," he said. "Staff needs to stay on the service side." I opened my mouth to respond, but he kept talking, his tone smooth and practiced. "These events have sponsors, expectations. We try to maintain a certain flow. Flow." He gestured toward the hallway behind me, as if guiding a child back to safety. "That door isn't for everyone." That's when it happened. Someone laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just enough to confirm the hierarchy. I didn't see who it was, but I didn't need to. Laughter like that isn't about humor. It's about permission. I felt my face warm, not with shame, but with something sharper. Awareness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. I realized then that they weren't confused about who I was. They had already decided what I was worth, and everything else was just maintenance. I turned away without another word and stepped fully into the service corridor. The door behind me closed. Not slammed, not dramatic, just that same dry sound. Final. I leaned my back against the wall and let myself breathe. Slow in, slower out. The envelope was still in my hand, uncreased, untouched. My name still printed clearly on the front. Claire Morgan. I had earned that invitation. I knew it. Somewhere inside that mansion, someone knew it too, but the room hadn't asked. And that was the lesson. Because humiliation doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as policy, as standards, as how things are done. I left the mansion 10 minutes later, documents undelivered, instructions incomplete, something unfinished humming in my chest. On the bus ride home, I watched reflections blur across the window and tried to convince myself it didn't matter. But it did, because what stayed with me wasn't the laughter. It was the door, the weight of it, the sound it made when it closed, and the quiet understanding that if I ever walked through it again, it wouldn't be by accident. What I didn't know then was that someone inside that room had seen the entire exchange, and he hadn't said a word. I thought that night was over. I was wrong, because the next morning, my phone lit up with a message that made no sense at all. And suddenly the door I couldn't open was no longer the most important part of the story. Before that door ever closed behind me, I had already learned how to move through the world quietly. Not invisibly, quietly. There's a difference. Invisible means no one sees you. Quiet means people see you and decide not to listen. I had mastered the second, long before I understood the first. Every morning started the same way. Alarm at 5:40. Coffee brewed too strong because I needed it to last. Shoes by the door, bag packed the night before. Bus schedule folded and refolded until the creases stayed. I learned early that missing one bus meant missing everything after it. Late meant unreliable. Unreliable meant replaceable. So I was never late. The bus stop was always the same corner. Same cracked pavement. Same flickering streetlight. Same group of people pretending not to notice one another. We didn't talk. We waited. Waiting was the one thing we all had in common. I stood there most mornings with my headphones in but no music playing. It wasn't about sound. It was about boundaries. A way of saying I'm here, but I'm not available. Some mornings my mother waited with me. She never said much. She didn't need to. Her presence alone reminded me why I moved the way I did, why I kept my head down, why I never assumed doors would open just because I knocked. "Don't rush," she would say quietly, even when the bus lights appeared in the distance. "Missing one doesn't mean you miss everything." She believed that. I wasn't sure I did. The bus ride itself was unremarkable. Plastic seats, advertisements peeling at the corners, windows scratched just enough to blur the city into something softer than reality. But I watched carefully. I always did. People boarded with purpose or exhaustion. Some dressed for offices that wouldn't remember them. Others for jobs that would. Everyone holding something they didn't want to lose. I learned how to observe long before I learned how to speak. That's where it started. At work, I was efficient. Not impressive. Useful in a way that didn't draw attention. I handled documents, compliance checks, quiet coordination. The work that had to be done correctly but never thanked publicly. My name didn't appear in meetings. It appeared in email chains, often forwarded without comment. Claire, can you verify this? Claire, can you cross-check these figures? Claire, can you handle this discreetly? Discreetly was code. It meant do it well and don't ask questions. I didn't mind. Not at first. There was comfort in being relied on, even if no one acknowledged it. But over time, I noticed something unsettling. The louder someone was, the less prepared they seemed. The quieter I became, the more responsibility landed on my desk. I was trusted, just not seen. One afternoon, months before the mansion incident, I sat across from a senior associate during a meeting I technically wasn't supposed to attend. I had been asked to take notes, which really meant absorb information without participating. Halfway through, he made a claim that was wrong. Not debatable, wrong. I hesitated, waited. No one corrected him. So I did, just once, calmly, with evidence. The room went still. He smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly. Let's circle back to that, he said, and continued as if I hadn't spoken. After the meeting, he pulled me aside. You're very capable, he said, voice low. But part of success here is knowing when not to insert yourself. Insert yourself? I nodded, thanked him, adjusted. That night, my mother asked how work had gone. I told her it was fine. She nodded, knowing better than to push. She had spent her life navigating similar rooms, just with different furniture. Some places, she said softly, stirring soup that had been reheated too many times, don't reward effort. They reward familiarity. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because I already understood. That was the world I came from. The one where progress was incremental, conditional, and often invisible. Where you learned to read faces before reading contracts. Where you memorized exits, not entrances. So when the invitation arrived weeks later, heavy paper, formal language, my name spelled correctly, I didn't celebrate. I paused. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the texture, the implication. An invitation isn't always an opening. Sometimes it's a test. That night, I placed the envelope on my desk beside my bus pass. 2 objects that didn't belong together. One represented where I had been allowed to go. The other represented where I was being asked to appear. I stared at them longer than I should have, because something didn't sit right. And somewhere deep down, I felt it. That same quiet hum I'd felt in the service corridor. The sense that this wasn't about access. It was about sorting. What I didn't know yet was that the mansion wasn't the first place where doors had closed behind me. It was just the first place where I noticed the sound. At the time, I thought the rules were fixed. I was wrong, because there was another world layered on top of mine. One with different entrances, different silences, and different consequences. And I was about to see it up close. The first thing I learned about elite spaces was that they never announce themselves. They don't say welcome. They say behave. The rules aren't written. They're absorbed, through posture, tone, timing, through who gets interrupted and who doesn't, through who waits and who is waited for. I noticed it the moment I stepped into my first private event, weeks before the mansion. Not the one with chandeliers and valet lines, but a smaller gathering, tucked into a renovated loft with exposed brick and quiet security at the door. The kind of place where everyone looked relaxed in a way that required money. I wasn't invited. I was brought. A senior consultant needed help coordinating documents for a closed-door discussion. Just logistics, he said. You won't need to speak. That phrase again. I entered through a side corridor, not hidden, just indirect. The door was unmarked, heavy. It closed behind me with a muted sound that lingered longer than it should have. I paused. Not because I was nervous, because the sound was final. Inside, the room smelled like citrus and polished wood. People stood in small clusters, voices low, movements deliberate. No one rushed. No one apologized for taking space. I stayed near the wall, tablet in hand, watching. That's when I saw Naomi. She moved differently than the rest. Not rushed, not deferential, not loud. Efficient. She wasn't dressed like staff, but she wasn't dressed like a guest either. Neutral colors, clean lines, shoes chosen for function, not display. People spoke to her with expectation, not command. She nodded, pointed, adjusted. Things happened. I watched closely. When someone important arrived, she didn't greet them. She simply shifted position, subtle, precise, and suddenly the room opened in the right direction. That's when I understood. Power didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it redirected. Later, as I handed over a document set, she glanced at me. Really glanced. Not the polite scan others used. A full second longer than necessary. "You're Claire, right?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "You catch details most people miss," she said. Not praise, observation. Then she walked away. That stayed with me longer than it should have, because no one else had said my name all night. Over the next few weeks, I saw more of that world. Always adjacent, always peripheral, never central. I learned how conversations worked, how jokes landed differently depending on who told them, how mistakes were forgiven if you belonged, and magnified if you didn't. I watched men say nothing and be heard, women say everything and be dismissed. I learned that confidence wasn't volume, it was assumption. One afternoon, I overheard two guests laughing near a balcony. "He doesn't even come through the main entrance anymore," one said casually. "Of course not," the other replied. "He hates lines." They laughed. I didn't, because I realized then that entrances weren't about convenience. They were about hierarchy. You entered where you believed you belonged, and the building adjusted accordingly. That night, as I exited through the same side door, I hesitated again. The same heavy panel, the same dull sound as it closed. I didn't know why it bothered me, but it did. Days later, I saw Naomi again, this time in a hallway outside a meeting I was coordinating. She was checking a list, her finger tracing names with quiet precision. She paused, looked up at me. "You'll want to keep tomorrow evening open," she said. Not a question. "For what?" I asked. She hesitated just long enough to matter. "Possibilities," she replied. Then she moved on. The next day I received an email. No logo, no explanation, just a single line. "Use the main entrance." Below it, a time, a location. And my name. I read it twice, then a third time. Because something about it felt intentional, not generous, measured. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know what waited on the other side. But I knew this. Someone had seen me move quietly through their world, and instead of stopping me, they had shifted the door. At the time, I thought the email was an invitation. I was wrong. It was a test. I didn't prepare for the evening the way people expect. No new clothes, no rehearsed confidence, no imaginary conversations in the mirror. I prepared the way I always had, by understanding the room before stepping into it. The building was understated. No velvet ropes, no photographers. Just a clean facade and a security presence that didn't ask questions unless it had to. I arrived early, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted to watch. Inside, the space was divided into zones without walls. Conversations formed and dissolved organically, but always around the same people. I recognized some faces from previous events. Others I didn't, but I could tell who mattered by who didn't need to announce themselves. Naomi spotted me almost immediately. She didn't smile, she didn't greet me. She nodded. That was all. She gestured toward a table near the center, not dominant, not hidden. Neutral ground. "Sit," she said quietly. "Don't speak unless asked." I did exactly that. The first scene unfolded without warning. A man joined the table, mid-40s, calm posture, nothing performative about him. No watch visible, no phone in hand. He listened more than he spoke. When someone asked him a question, the room adjusted its breathing. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew his gravity. The discussion turned technical. Risk exposure, compliance pressure, an acquisition no one wanted Toisson to claim ownership of. People circled the issue without touching it. That's when he looked at me. Not suddenly, not directly, just included. "What's your read?" he asked. No title, no introduction. The table went still. I felt it. The collective hesitation. The unspoken question. Why her? I answered anyway. Not fast, not apologetically. I explained the structural weakness no one was addressing. The missing layer. The risk that wasn't obvious because it required patience to see. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften my words. I finished. Silence followed. Then he asked the second question. "Where did you learn to see things like that?" I hesitated. By not being allowed to speak, I said. That earned me something close to a reaction, but not approval. Recognition. The meeting moved on. He didn't look at me again, which somehow felt intentional. Later, during a break, Naomi approached with 2 glasses of water. She placed one in front of me. "You didn't flinch," she said. "I wasn't sure I was supposed to," I replied. She almost smiled. The second scene came later, smaller, quieter. I was reviewing a document set near the window when I felt someone behind me. Not close, just present. "You notice patterns," a voice said. It was him. Up close, he looked even more unremarkable. That was the point. "I notice inconsistencies," I replied. "That's rarer," he said. He glanced at the document in my hands, not reading, just confirming its existence. "Why are you here?" he asked. The question wasn't philosophical. It was practical. "To make sure things don't break," I said. "Even when no one's looking." He nodded once. Then he did something strange. He said nothing else. He walked away. No offer, no reassurance, no hint. I stood there longer than necessary, trying to understand what had just happened. The third scene came hours later, after most people had left. Naomi found me near the exit. She handed me a slim envelope. No logo. No explanation. "Just wait. Don't open it here," she said. "Is this—" I started. She shook her head. "It's not an invitation," she said quietly. "It's a decision." Then she walked away. Outside, the night air felt sharper than before. I waited until I was alone to open the envelope. Inside was a single card. White, heavy stock. 1 line of text. "Tomorrow. Main entrance." Below it, a location I recognized immediately. The mansion, the same one. I stared at the words longer than I should have. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about being welcomed. It was about being tested publicly. And whoever had made this decision wasn't offering protection. They were offering exposure. At the time, I thought the hardest part would be walking through the door. I had no idea the door itself was the point. The car didn't stop in front of the house. That was the first disruption. Instead of pulling into the curved driveway where arrivals were filtered, verified, and sorted, the driver slowed near the side street, the one most guests never noticed because it wasn't meant to be used, the one that led to the main doors. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The engine cut softly, almost respectfully, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of gravel settling beneath the tires. No music, no announcement. Just the night holding its breath. The door opened. Not rushed, not theatrical, just precise. I stepped out. The mansion stood ahead of me, lit from below, its architecture designed to intimidate without trying. Glass, stone, symmetry. A place built to remind people of their position before they ever spoke. I adjusted my posture without thinking. Not to look taller, to look settled. The main entrance doors were already visible, taller than necessary, darker than the surrounding facade, framed by 2 guards who weren't checking lists. They were waiting. I took 3 steps forward before anyone noticed. That was enough. The first head turned near the terrace. Then another. Conversations didn't stop immediately. They fractured. Voices thinned. Laughter lost confidence. By the time I reached the base of the stairs, silence had begun spreading in waves. This wasn't shock yet. It was confusion. Confusion is always louder internally than externally. One of the guards moved first. He didn't raise a hand, He didn't ask a question. He simply stepped aside. The doors opened slowly. Not automatically. Manually. And as they did, I heard it. The sound I hadn't understood before. The heavy hinge releasing. A low, deliberate shift. The opposite of a door closing. Inside, the room reacted as if gravity had been adjusted. Music continued playing, but thinner now, as if unsure it was still welcome. A waiter froze mid-step. A glass hovered near someone's lips and never reached them. I crossed the threshold. The doors closed behind me. Not with force, with certainty. The sound echoed once. Dry, final. That sound landed differently now. It wasn't exclusion. It was arrival. I didn't rush. I didn't scan the room. I let the room scan me. Grant Wexler was near the center, exactly where he liked to stand, visible without seeming eager. He was laughing when I entered. He stopped halfway through it. Not dramatically, just enough. His eyes moved first, then his mouth adjusted, trying to catch up with new information his body hadn't approved yet. He recognized me. Not because of my face, because of the door. People like Grant didn't memorize faces. They memorized patterns, and this pattern didn't belong to me. At least it wasn't supposed to. I felt movement beside me before I saw him. Daniel Kerr didn't announce himself. He never did. He simply appeared at my side, as if he had been there all along and the room had only just caught up. No arm around me, no gesture of ownership, just proximity. Intentional, unavoidable. The shift was immediate. Someone whispered his name, not loudly but urgently, like a warning being passed too late. Grant noticed then. Not Daniel, the space between us. The fact that Daniel hadn't approached to greet me. The fact that he hadn't introduced me. The fact that he didn't need to. Grant took a step forward instinctively, then stopped. That hesitation was new. He glanced at Naomi, who stood near the edge of the room, calm, unreadable. She didn't look back at him. She looked at me. The host approached, smiling too carefully. "Welcome," he said, his voice measured. "We're glad you could join us." He didn't ask my name. He already knew it. He acknowledged Daniel with a nod, then returned his attention to me. "You're expected," he added. That single word rewrote the room. Expected meant planned. Planned meant approved. Approved meant power. Grant tried to recover. He laughed lightly, stepping into my path as if nothing had happened. "Didn't realize you were on the list," he said, his tone almost playful. "Almost." Daniel spoke for the first time. "Neither did you," he said calmly. Not sharp, not loud, just accurate. Grant's smile held for half a second too long. People nearby pretended not to listen. No one moved away. No one wanted to miss what came next. Daniel turned slightly, not toward Grant, but toward the host. "We'll take a moment," he said. Not a request. The host nodded immediately. Space cleared. Not aggressively, naturally. I hadn't said a word yet. I didn't need to. Everything was already happening. Grant stood there, unsure whether to stay or retreat. For the first time that evening, he didn't know which door applied to him. That was when Grant realized something had shifted. Not socially, structurally, and he still didn't know why. Shock doesn't arrive loudly in rooms like that. It spreads, slow, careful, almost polite. At first, people pretended nothing had changed. Conversations resumed with slightly altered tones. Laughter returned, but thinner now, strained at the edges. Everyone was trying to figure out what they had missed, and who else already knew. That uncertainty was contagious. I felt it in the way bodies shifted when I passed, in the half-second pauses before people decided whether to acknowledge me, in the recalculation happening behind practiced smiles. Grant attempted his first correction quickly. He turned to a man near the bar, someone whose approval usually anchored his position, and spoke just loudly enough to be overheard. "Daniel's been unpredictable lately," he said lightly. "Bringing consultants." The word hung in the air. Consultants meant temporary, disposable, explainable. The man didn't respond the way Grant expected. He nodded once toward me, then excused himself. Grant watched him go, his confidence misfiring. Across the room, Naomi moved with intent. She wasn't organizing anymore. She was observing reactions. Who leaned in? Who leaned away? Who pretended not to notice? She caught my eye briefly. That was enough. The second scene unfolded near the terrace doors. A small group formed, people who usually positioned themselves near influence without being obvious about it. They spoke in fragments, voices low but urgent. Did you see how she entered? No list check. Daniel didn't introduce her. That's not accidental. Someone else added. Grant told her to use the service entrance last time. That landed, not as gossip, as evidence. A woman with a diamond bracelet too large for her wrist shook her head slowly. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate wasn't sympathy, it was judgment. Grant felt it too. He approached Daniel this time, not me. His posture was careful, deferential in a way that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. Daniel, he said, good to see you. Daniel acknowledged him with a brief look. No handshake, no smile. Grant gestured vaguely in my direction. I didn't realize she was... Daniel raised a hand. Not to stop him, to pace him. Later, Daniel said. One word. Grant nodded too quickly. As Daniel turned away, Grant remained where he was, alone, suspended in a social vacuum he didn't understand how to escape. That was when the third scene began. A server approached me with a tray. She hesitated, unsure whether to address me formally or casually. Daniel noticed. Thank you, he said to her, taking a glass and handing it to me himself. That gesture rippled outward. The server's posture straightened. Nearby guests took note. If Daniel Kerr served me, I wasn't peripheral. I was positioned. I finally spoke then, not loudly, not dramatically. I appreciate it, I said. That was all. Grant's jaw tightened. He tried one last angle, humor. Guess doors have been changing lately, he said, forcing a laugh. No one joined him. Naomi stepped closer, her voice neutral. They always have, she said. Some people just don't notice until they're on the wrong side. That wasn't an attack. It was a diagnosis. Grant looked around for support. Found none. People began drifting away, not abruptly, but decisively. One by one, they repositioned themselves closer to Daniel, closer to me, further from Grant. Status was migrating. Silently, Grant adjusted his stance, squared his shoulders. I assume there's been some misunderstanding, he said, louder now. Daniel turned slowly. There hasn't, he replied. That was it. No elaboration. No defense. Grant swallowed. The final scene arrived quietly. The host approached Naomi and spoke into her ear. She nodded once, then crossed the room toward Grant. Grant, she said, there's something you'll want to see. He followed her reluctantly, glancing back once, as if checking whether I would be watching. I was, not with satisfaction, with clarity, because I knew what Naomi carried, and I knew Grant would understand it immediately. Naomi opened the folder in front of him, and Grant stopped breathing. The folder Naomi opened wasn't dramatic. That was the first thing Grant noticed. No red stamps, no bold warnings, no visible panic. Just paper. Clean, structured, quiet. That made it worse. He leaned forward instinctively, scanning the top page like someone hoping to find their name misspelled. Naomi didn't rush him. She stood beside the table, hands folded, posture neutral. Daniel remained several steps away, watching. Grant's eyes moved faster now. I recognized the shift immediately. This wasn't confusion. This was recognition. The second page stopped him. His fingers tightened at the edges. Not enough to crease the paper, but enough to betray control. What is this? He asked. Naomi didn't answer. She didn't need to. The third page answered for her. A timeline, dates, transfers, entities connected by thin, unemotional arrows. Grant exhaled sharply through his nose, a sound that tried to disguise panic as irritation. This isn't finalized, he said. These are internal drafts. Daniel took one step forward. They're filed, he said calmly. That makes them final enough. Grant looked up at him, eyes flicking with calculation. You can't seriously be entertaining this here. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't have to, because the room was listening now. Not directly, but intently. I watched faces turn, not toward Grant, but toward Naomi, toward Daniel, toward me. People were starting to understand this wasn't personal. It was procedural. The second scene unfolded when the host joined us. He approached cautiously, voice low, Is there a problem? Naomi turned the folder toward him. Not yet, she said, but there will be if this isn't addressed. The host skimmed the page, then another. His expression didn't change much, but his posture did. He straightened. I'll need a moment, he said. Grant spoke too quickly. This is being taken out of context. Naomi met his eyes. Context doesn't change signatures. That was the first time someone nearby reacted audibly. A sharp inhale. Someone stepped back. The host closed the folder. Grant, he said, we'll discuss this privately. Grant shook his head. No, we'll discuss this properly. Daniel tilted his head slightly. This is proper. That ended it. The third scene came not with confrontation, but with confirmation. The host gestured discreetly to two staff members. One left the room. Another repositioned near Grant. Not threatening, just present. Grant noticed. Everyone did. A woman near the terrace whispered something to her partner. He nodded slowly. Someone else checked their phone. I didn't move. I didn't need to, because this part had never been about me explaining anything. The paperwork spoke. Naomi continued, her voice steady. The acquisition was structured under your oversight. The compliance exemptions were signed by you, and the shell entity. She paused. Not for drama, for precision, was flagged last quarter. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. He tried another tactic. Claire had no standing here. Naomi didn't look at him. She does now. That landed harder than anything else, because it reframed the entire evening. The humiliation, the doors, the correction. This wasn't coincidence. It was calibration. The fourth scene happened fast. The host straightened again. Grant, I'm going to ask you to step away from the floor. Grant laughed once. Too loud. You can't do that. Daniel spoke then. Soft. You don't have to agree, he said. You just have to comply. Silence spread. Grant's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, willing to interrupt. No one did, because this wasn't a scandal. It was worse. It was alignment. He straightened his jacket. I expect discretion. Naomi nodded. So do we. Grant turned to leave, stopping just long enough to glance at me. Not with anger, with something closer to disbelief. Like he had just realized the mistake wasn't telling me to use the service entrance. It was assuming that's where my story ended. As he disappeared through the side corridor, the one he had pointed me toward months ago, the room exhaled. Not relief, recalibration. The final scene arrived without announcement. The host returned, voice clear enough to carry. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, thank you for your patience. He gestured toward Daniel. And thank you, Claire, for your diligence. That was it. No applause. No explanation. But names shifted in the air. People adjusted, and for the first time that night, I felt the hierarchy settle correctly. As Grant reached the end of the corridor, a security door closed behind him. The sound was unmistakable. Dry final, and everyone heard it. Grant didn't return. That was the first confirmation. In rooms like that, absence speaks louder than removal. People noticed quickly. Conversations bent around the empty space where he had been standing. Glances drifted toward the corridor he had disappeared into, then away again, like touching a hot surface and pulling back instinctively. No one asked where he went. They didn't need to. The first scene unfolded quietly. A man who had laughed with Grant earlier now stood alone near the bar, staring into his glass as if it might give him instructions. A woman who had mirrored Grant's opinions all night suddenly found something urgent on her phone. I watched alliances dissolve without a word being said. Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to. Power doesn't chase collapse. It waits for it. The second scene began when the host approached again, this time with a different posture. Not cautious, not apologetic. Resolved. Claire, he said, would you join us for a moment? He gestured toward a side area, not hidden, but slightly elevated. Visible enough to be noticed. Quiet enough to be controlled. Naomi joined us. Daniel followed, his presence shifting the geometry of the room without effort. The host spoke low. Grant's access has been suspended for the remainder of the event. Naomi nodded once. And tomorrow? Daniel asked. The host exhaled. Tomorrow it becomes formal. That was it. No threats, no raised voices, just sequence. I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, but alignment. This was how consequences were supposed to work. Clean, irreversible, boring almost. The third scene arrived unexpectedly. A woman approached me, someone I recognized. She had been standing near Grant earlier, close enough to be seen with him. Now she stopped at a careful distance, smile rehearsed. "Claire," she said, "I didn't realize you were involved in all of this." I held her gaze. Neither did I, at first. She nodded too quickly. "If there's anything I can do..." Daniel shifted slightly beside me. Not forward, just enough, she noticed. Everyone did. Her sentence dissolved. "I'm glad to see you here," she said instead, retreating with dignity intact, but relevance uncertain. The fourth scene was the most revealing. The doors, not the VIP doors, the side ones. Staff began to reposition subtly, closing certain paths, opening others. Movement was guided now, controlled. Grant was no longer directing traffic. That mattered. Because in elite spaces, authority is less about presence and more about access. Who can move freely? Who cannot? I watched as people recalibrated themselves around that truth. The fifth scene happened near the end of the night. The host raised his glass. Not for a toast, but for closure. "Thank you all for attending," he said. "We appreciate your discretion and your understanding." Discretion. That word rippled. Grant's name wasn't mentioned. It didn't have to be. He had already been edited out. The final scene came later, as the room thinned. I stood near the edge of the terrace, the city lights sharp against the dark. Naomi joined me, folding her arms against the night air. "You handled that well," she said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. She smiled slightly. "Exactly." Daniel approached then. Not as an ally, not as a rescuer, as a constant. "The fallout will take time," he said, "but it will be thorough." I nodded. I figured. He studied me for a moment. "You were never invisible." I looked back at the room, at the empty space, at the rearranged hierarchy. "I know," I said, "but now they do too." Daniel nodded once. And then he left. Not dramatically, not watched, because his role in this part was complete. The last thing I saw before leaving was the corridor door again, the one Grant had exited through. Still closed, still silent, still final. As I stepped toward the exit, Naomi handed me a card. New access. New permissions. She leaned in slightly. "Tomorrow," she said, "everything opens." The first email arrived before sunrise. I hadn't slept much. Not because of adrenaline, because of silence. The kind that comes after a system finishes rearranging itself. When I reached for my phone, the screen lit up with a sender I recognized immediately. Subject access confirmed. No greeting, no explanation, just confirmation. I sat up slowly, the city still dark beyond the window. Somewhere below, traffic hummed like it always did, unaware that my life had crossed an invisible threshold overnight. The email contained 3 attachments: a revised access badge, a calendar invitation, and a single line of text at the bottom. "Use the main entrance." I stared at that sentence longer than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. That was the real shift. The second scene unfolded 2 hours later. The building was different in the morning. Cleaner, quieter, more intentional. The lobby no longer felt like a test. Security recognized me without checking twice. The badge worked on the first scan. No hesitation. No correction. The doors opened smoothly, soundless this time. Inside, people looked up. Not out of curiosity, but awareness. The kind that comes when someone's presence has already been circulated. A man I didn't know nodded. A woman stepped aside without realizing she'd done it. I walked through without adjusting my pace. The third scene took place in a conference room with glass walls. Daniel wasn't there. That mattered. Instead, 6 people waited around the table, folders neatly arranged, devices closed. Naomi stood near the window, arms relaxed, posture neutral. "This is Claire," she said simply. "She'll be leading today." No résumé. No justification, just placement. I took the seat at the head of the table, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, but precise. This wasn't elevation. It was alignment catching up to reality. We began. I spoke less than expected, asked questions instead, watched how answers bent. Who filled silence? Who avoided specifics? By the end of the hour, decisions had been made without debate. Not because I forced them, but because the framework was clear. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out. They waited. For direction. The fourth scene happened at lunch. An invitation appeared. Private dining room, reserved. I declined. Instead, I ate in the open space. Visibility matters in transitions. Conversations paused as I passed. Not out of judgment now, but recalibration. People adjusted themselves around my presence like furniture being moved after a renovation. A man approached cautiously. "Claire," he said, "if you ever need—" I smiled politely. "I'll let you know." He nodded, relieved by the boundary. The fifth scene arrived mid-afternoon. A call. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Claire," a voice said, controlled, measured, too careful. It was Grant's attorney. He spoke in hypotheticals, in concerns, in misunderstandings. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I waited a full 3 seconds before responding. "Any communication should go through official channels," I said. "This line won't be one of them." Silence, then a quiet acknowledgement. The call ended. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure. The sixth scene took place near the elevators. Naomi caught up with me, handing over a slim folder. "Your access has expanded," she said. "You'll notice changes." I flipped it open. Names, projects, permissions. I looked up. "Who approved this?" She smiled faintly. "You did, last night." I thought of the door. The sound it made when it closed. How final it had felt. This was the other side of that sound. The opening. Slow. Intentional. The seventh scene came as the day ended. I stood by the windows again. City lights returning like punctuation. My reflection in the glass looked familiar, but steadier. As if something unnecessary had been removed. Daniel joined me without announcement. "You're adapting quickly," he said. "I'm not adapting," I replied. "I'm stopping the adjustment." He considered that. "That's rarer." I turned to him. "You didn't step in." "No," he said. "You didn't need it." We stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again. "Tomorrow there will be resistance." "I know. They'll test boundaries." "I expect it." He nodded once. "Good." Then he left. Not ceremonially. Not acknowledged. Because power doesn't linger where it's already established. The final scene happened as I exited the building. The main doors opened automatically this time. No sound. No delay. Outside, the city felt the same, but I didn't. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, my phone vibrated. A message. "Naomi. Tomorrow morning, private briefing, same room." Then a second line appeared. "You'll want to see who's attending." I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. Behind me, the doors closed softly. Not the heavy sound from before. This one was quieter, controlled. And for the first time, I realized something important. I wasn't entering their world anymore. I was organizing it. That night, an updated guest list arrived. One name was missing. Another, unexpected, had been added. And it was highlighted. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no headlines, no applause. Just clarity. I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. Not choosing what looked impressive, but what felt accurate. I settled on something simple. Structured. Intentional. The kind of clothing that doesn't ask for permission or explain itself. When I left my apartment, the hallway felt narrower than it used to. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The drive downtown was quiet. I watched reflections slide across the glass, the city rearranging itself into familiar shapes. Somewhere between the third traffic light and the bridge, I realized I wasn't thinking about Grant anymore. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just absence. That was the final consequence. Inside the building, the lobby was already active. Conversations moved in low tones. Phones vibrated. Decisions were forming before meetings began. The private briefing room was prepared when I arrived. Glass walls, neutral light, no seat labels. I chose where to sit. That detail mattered more than anything else. People entered gradually. Some I recognized, others I didn't. A few paused when they saw me, recalculating where to stand, where to place their folders, how to greet. One chair remained empty. I knew who it had belonged to. Naomi closed the door gently behind the last person. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. As the meeting began, I noticed something subtle. No one questioned why I was leading. No one asked for context. They already knew. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from announcements. It comes from alignment. Midway through the discussion, a document appeared on the screen. Clean, precise, undeniable. No accusations, no emotion, just structure and consequence. The room adjusted. Some nodded. Others went still. No one defended the absence. There was nothing left to defend. When the meeting ended, people stood slowly, not rushing, not lingering, waiting to see what would happen next. I closed my folder. "That will be all," I said. And they left, one by one. The room emptied without resistance. Later, as I walked back toward the elevators, I passed the VIP doors. The same ones. They stood open now. Wide, unremarkable, the memory of their weight, the sound they once made when they closed behind me, felt distant. Not erased, integrated. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Some thresholds only matter the moment you cross them. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because my place in it no longer required negotiation. They had pointed me to the wrong door. Not by accident, by instinct. They thought directing me was the same as defining me. They were wrong. Doors don't decide who belongs. People do. And now, every door I walk through opens because it already knows my name. If you stayed until the end, it's because this story touched something familiar. Because somewhere in your life, someone looked at you and decided you belonged somewhere smaller, quieter, out of sight. These stories are for the ones who were redirected. Not because they were lost, but because others couldn't imagine them arriving differently. If that's you, you're not alone here. Join us. And before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? Some journeys begin at the wrong door and end with the world opening quietly.